Salvete omnes, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the wonderful Cicero Pro Archia 16 and pouring through that specific section because I think it really speaks to the value of education and a broad education at that, one that embraces, yes, the classics, but also the humanities and arts more broadly. I think it also addresses a certain elephant in the room that often, as a classics teacher, I encounter, and I'm sure many classics teachers, those teachers of Latin and Greek, have encountered it with me, as well as most classics students. And it's this little ditty in particular. Now, often, as it has with me, it might trigger you. And in the course of triggering you, as a classics aficionado, you can get rather zealous in your defense. And regardless of whether you speak from a place of logic or from a place of reason, enlightenment, or from an emotional and perhaps even comical standpoint, often what will come back to you is some deeply entrenched notion that will be reiterating the same very thing. Now, to this, Cicero here, our boy, Marcus Tullius Cicero, Cicero, if you want to go all classical, has something of a response. And the response comes from his speech, his oration, on behalf of the poet Aulus Licinius Archias in 62 BCE. That's 1 year after his famous Catilinarian speeches, which resulted in the foiling of a plot hatched by this fellow here, Lucius Sergius Catilina. Now, Catilina, or Catiline as he's better known as, thought, well, I've spent years campaigning as a young noble aristocrat with consular ambitions for that very top job. And each time I have not been able to reach that lofty goal, even losing to this old codger over here. So if I can't get it by the usual and legitimate means of electoral campaigning and rampant bribery, then I'll take it by force. And so Catiline gathered to himself all manner of ne'er-do-wells, ex-slaves, and the like, into a kind of an army, a personal army, with the hope of obtaining by force what he couldn't obviously obtain by the regular means. Now, as a result of Cicero's fine series of orations, Catiline's conspiracy was quickly exposed and had the result of isolating Catiline from any support that he could have possibly gathered from Rome itself, from the Senate, which would lead Catiline to flee the city, band together with his little army. He was soundly defeated in battle by the other consul at the time, and for Cicero's efforts that could have very well resulted in his subsequent demise, he was awarded the title of Pater Patriae, Father of the Country. In this image here, we see that first Catilinarian conspiracy being held, being orated to the Senate, although it really wasn't in the Senate House at the time. was at the temple of Jupiter Stator, and you can see the support base of Catiline being essentially non-existent, with all the senators in the Senate House moving swiftly away from him. In these more trying times, we can perhaps even see other kinds of parallels at work here. Now, to the case itself, there are a few parties that we need to be aware of, just to kind of get a bit of the background. In this battle of attorneys, really, we've got, yes, Cicero representing the defense of Aulus Licinius Archias, and on the side of the prosecution, we have a fellow that we know as Gratius, simply because the speech itself tells us that the prosecutor's name is Gratius. Now, the prosecutor is trying to get Archias on this law, on the point of this law, the Lex Papia de Peregrinis, which essentially said, if you're masquerading as a citizen, that is, you are a non-citizen, you could be expelled from the city of Rome. In response, Cicero is arguing his case, or at least the facts of his case, according to the Lex Plautia Papiria, which in 89 BCE enfranchised those members of townships that had rebelled against Roman rule in the social war, granting them Roman citizenship. These were towns, Italian towns, that didn't support the Roman cause and yet found themselves in a Roman world after the social war had run its course. Behind these parties, we had a very different individual representing the prosecution, or the force behind the prosecution, and that person was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, otherwise known as Pompey, a very powerful politician and statesman who was hoping to weaken a political rival. And that political rival happened to be the patron of Aulus Licinius, Archias, Lucius Licinius Lucullus. So there are these political ambitions behind the case, which compel Cicero to take some interesting directions in defense of his client. Cicero would in fact argue for the crux of his case after establishing that yes, according to the Lex Plautia Papiria, not only is Archias a citizen who's been enfranchised, but every time there's been a census at Rome, he just has happened to be on campaign, the good client that he is, with his patron Lucullus. And there's no record of him being enfranchised because, of course, there wouldn't be. The record house in the Italian township that he had registered in as a citizen when he was enfranchised had burnt down. There's no records anywhere. But, of course, he was a citizen. Given that it is something of an open and shut case, and Cicero wants to make it abundantly clear that it should be considered as such, he takes a rather daring tact. And that is to argue that it's education that has made him the man that he is today, that has enabled him to defend the state and be the preeminent orator and statesman, lawyer that he is, that he has been, and that he will continue to be, only because of the liberal education that he has received. And in fact, if he's argued at all convincingly in this speech, then it should reflect the education that he has received from his childhood mentor, his childhood grammaticus, none other than Aulus Licinius Archias himself. So it's a clever play by our boy Cicero, and one that speaks to the civic value of poets and writers and educators like Archias. So even if he isn't a citizen, he should be considered one for the value his profession has to the state. Now to the text itself.
Okay, so let's get into it. Haec studia adolescentiam arceunt. So obviously with studia and adolescentiam, we get some direct English derivatives. Haec studia, these studies. And they've got to do something, and arceunt, they sharpen. So these studies sharpen. We think of acute. Adolescentiam, adolescence or youth. Senectutem oblectant. Senectutem as our object here, singular, so it can't obviously be the assumed subject of oblectant. So we're going to look at haec studia as the assumed subject here. So they oblectant, delight, senectutem, old age. Secundas res ornant, same deal with ornant, our assumed subject being haec studia. So they ornant, furnish. We get words like adorn from it, or ornate. But the idea being here is that they dress up. Secundus res, favorable circumstances. And I'm sure anyone who's ever studied Latin will look at the word race and remember that although it told you in the dictionary that it means thing, it almost certainly never means thing, and has to change according to the circumstances. Adversis perfugium axolacium praebent. So praebent, they provide a perfugium, a refuge. Okay, so we've got perfugium here, and solacium, we get the word solace from it, which, fun enough, is exactly what it means, a solace or a comfort. So they provide a refuge and comfort adversis in adverse times, in adversities. Okay, so with that adversis there, I'll talk a bit more about it in the grammatical analysis to come, but basically going with the praebent there. They provide for adversities a refuge and comfort, but to make it into a bit more fluent English, just turned it into in adversities. Delectant domi. They delight at home. Now, if we look at that impediunt, you'll probably see that ped in there to do with the foot. The idea that something is in the way, okay, so there, in the way of your foot, i.e. impedes or blocks. Okay, so non-impediunt, they do not block. Or hinder or impede. And foris here being outside or away from home, which I probably think might be a better translation here. Pernoctant nobiscum. Pernoctant, from, you can see the noct in there. You get words like nocturnal from that particular stem, coming from nox, the noun there. So the idea is spending the entire night through, per. So they spend the night with us, nobiscum. Peregrinantur. They travel, i.e. with us. And finally, rusticantur. They live in the country with us. They live in the country with us. These studies sharpen youth, they delight old age, they furnish favorable circumstances, they provide a refuge and comfort in adversities, they delight at home, they do not impede away from home, they spend the night with us, they travel with us, they live in the country with us, the sense of they vacation with us, if you want to go with that translation. So let's pick apart the grammar. So for our first line there, we see Ike studia. So we've got neuter, plural, and nominative case. So this is going to be our subject. And one of the hints for translating any Latin sentence is to look, of course, for the verb. Many Latin students will already be familiar with this. So if you've got that plural form there, then you'll know that your subject's probably going to be plural, which helps us identify that this noun adjective pair too has to be plural. Adolescentiam here, accusative, singular, and so the direct object of acuunt, which is present, third person singular, present tense, third person singular, and active voice. Moving over to our next line, we've got senec tutem oblectant, and again, present tense for oblectant, third person, plural, active voice, so we've got to assume Ike studia as the subject. And senectutem, again, our accusative. And so we have our object. Then we've got secundus res ornat, and secundus agreeing with res, which is feminine plural, fifth declension, and accusative. Ornat, similarly, like oblectant and archeunt, works as a third person plural, present tense, active voice verb in the indicative. And again, that NT telling us it needs a plural subject. Then we've got pribent. They provide. So still referring back to our exstudia, except this time it takes a direct object and an indirect object, one that you'll normally expect after a verb like praibeo. So they provide or they offer. They provide a refuge, accusative, singular, neuter, likewise perfugium and a salacium together, both neuter, accusative. And you've got to provide the refuge and the comfort for something or to something, almost like as a response to something. And that indirect object that we have there is adversus, which is in the dative case. Translated it here in adversities because it's a more fluent translation of it, but it could just as easily be translated as they provide for adversities, a refuge and a comfort. They delight, delectant, atom, and some spicy de-alliteration there. And with that domi ending, what we've got is, of course, a glorious locative. They do not impede, non impediunt, away from home, which is an adverb. They spend the night with us, nobiscum here. Of course, we think cum nobis to be ablative, but the pronoun nobis often, when I say often, pretty much mean all the time, turning into nobiscum. And they travel with us, peregrinantur. Now this is a bit of a change from the verbs that we've seen up to this point, which have all been present tense, third person, plural, active, indicative. Peregrinantur, although it is all of these things, has what is called a deponent form, in that it looks passive but is active. Okay, from peregrinor, peregrinor, peregrinari, peregrinatus sum. So they travel with us. And same deal with rusticantor, another deponent. From rusticor. they live in the country with us or vacation with us. If you're a good Roman and you're living out in the country, provided that you're a rich fellow, I suppose, it probably means that you're at your vacation house in some beautiful spot in the, let's say, Italian countryside.
And there you have it, Cicero's stirring defense of not only his client, but of education itself, in a far more positive light than anything a triggered sensibility might be able to offer. Unsurprisingly, Cicero very much owns his opposition here, and perhaps even more unsurprisingly, if some commentaries are to be believed, given that his brother Quintus may well have been the sitting praetor in charge of the trial. Now, if you're interested in Cicero's Pro Archia and would like to know more, if you're a hardcore Latinist and you'd like to look at it in entirely its original form in Latin, then you can do this for free, which is the best price you can pay for a great work, by visiting the Latin Library, where it does have the complete text. Alternatively, if you need a bit of assistance with it or would like to compare an English translation in a kind of interlinear-ish kind of way, or alternatively have a helpful grammatical tool, word study tool, which might accompany the Latin, then Perseus is your good bet here. Wonderful Perseus collection. Or alternatively, if you'd like to look at the Latin and simply have the vocab to work through, No Dictionaries is a great little gem to explore, because it does give you the full dictionary forms for each word, and you can adjust the vocab to suit more or less according to the level of difficulty you'd like to work with. Alternatively, if you'd like to go to a physical form, you can't really go past Ceruti's volume of the Pro Archia Poeta Oratio in its 3rd edition, available through Bolchesi Carducci Publishers. Or alternatively, if you just like to read this and potentially other defense speeches by Cicero, Oxford World Classics has an accessible volume in the English that you could very well have a look at. And with that, thank you very much for joining me, and catch you in the next video. Valete!